He controlled an empire built on fear, blood, and absolute power. But tonight, Quan Te Jin, the most dangerous man in Seoul, stood alone in an empty room, hands trembling around a tiny baby bracelet no bigger than his thumb. A handwritten note fell from the drawer. 7 words. 7 words that destroyed everything he thought he was. One day our daughter will ask why. He had sent away the only woman who ever saw past the monster. He had chosen power over love. And now he was learning, too late, maybe forever, that some mistakes don't come with a second chance. If you've ever watched someone throw away something irreplaceable, stay until the very end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came in sideways that night, the kind that didn't fall so much as a tack. Sheets of cold water driving hard against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Kwan compound in the hills above Gangnam, rattling the glass like something outside wanted in. The security lights along the perimeter wall caught the rain and turned it silver, and the whole estate glowed in that strange way it sometimes did during storms, almost beautiful, almost alive, though nothing inside it felt either of those things anymore. Quan Te Jin stood at the window of his study on the second floor and watched the rain destroy the garden that Naya had planted. She had spent 3 weekends out there with a pair of second-hand gloves. She refused to let the housekeeping staff replace, insisting she liked the worn-down fingers because they let her feel the soil better. He had watched her from the same window once, early on a Saturday morning before she knew he was awake, and she had been laughing at something, at nothing really, just at the dirt on her hands and the crooked way the first row of flowers had come out, and the sound of it had reached him even through the glass. He hadn't known what to do with that sound. He still didn't. Now the flowers were drowning. He turned away from the window. The study was large and deliberately cold, black lacquered furniture, walls the color of charcoal, no photographs, no personal objects of any kind. That had always been the point. Taejin had designed every room in this compound to project the same message. Nothing here is soft. Nothing here is reachable. Nothing here can be used against me. The study communicated it best. Bookshelves lined with reports and financial documents rather than anything a person might actually read. A desk the size of a small country. A single lamp throwing hard light across papers he hadn't touched in 3 days. 3 days since he had told her to leave. 3 days since Nia Brooks had walked out of this house carrying 2 suitcases and the expression of someone who had already finished grieving before the conversation even started, like she had known it was coming long before he said the words, like she had been quietly preparing herself for weeks, and that quiet preparation was somehow the most devastating thing about it. She hadn't screamed, hadn't thrown anything, hadn't begged. She had simply looked at him with those dark eyes that always seemed to see further into him than he was comfortable with, and she had said very quietly, "All right, Taejin," and that had been the end of it. All right, like it was nothing, like 2 years meant nothing. He moved to the desk and sat down, not because there was anything to do, but because standing at the window watching rain drown dead flowers felt dangerously close to something he refused to name. He picked up a folder, quarterly projections from the Busan distribution network, opened it, stared at the numbers without reading them, and set it back down. His phone sat at the corner of the desk. 14 missed calls in 3 days, all from people who needed things from him. His lieutenant Park Sung-ho running logistics on the Incheon contract, the lawyers managing the Daegu property acquisition, representatives from the Yoon family, calling about the engagement arrangement that was apparently still proceeding, regardless of whether Taejin had agreed to anything formally. He hadn't called any of them back. He wasn't sure he was capable of caring about any of it right now, which frightened him considerably more than any of those callers could have. The thing about Quan Taejin, the thing that had allowed him to inherit a struggling mid-tier operation at 26 and turn it into the most feared criminal network in South Korea over the following decade, was that he did not lose his focus, ever, under any circumstances. He had closed deals while his father was dying in a hospital 2 floors below the conference room. He had ordered a rival operation dismantled on the same afternoon he attended the funeral of the man who ran it, someone he had actually respected. He had looked into the eyes of men who wanted to kill him and felt nothing except the cold satisfaction of knowing he was the one with the better plan. Focus was the only thing he trusted completely. and for 3 days it had been entirely, humiliatingly gone. He heard footsteps in the hallway, the specific rhythm of Park Sung-ho, who walked with a slight drag on his right foot from an old injury he never discussed. Taejin recognized the sound the way soldiers recognize the footsteps of their sergeants, involuntary and precise. A knock at the door. 2 sharp raps. Always 2. "Come in," Sung-ho entered. He was 41, built like something assembled from spare construction materials, with a face that had been rearranged by violence at least twice and never quite set back correctly. He had been Taejin's second-in-command for 7 years, and his closest thing to a friend for longer than that. And the only reason Taejin tolerated his presence right now was that Sung-ho had the unusual quality of not requiring conversation to fill silence. He stepped inside, closed the door, and looked at the desk. At the untouched folder, the cold cup of tea, the papers arranged exactly as they had been the last time he'd come in here. "The Yoon people called again," Sung-ho said. "I heard. They're getting impatient." "Let them." Sung-ho was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window, at the rain. He did not look at Taejin with any expression that might be described as concern, because he understood that would not be well received. "The Incheon shipment. Handle it. It's above my authorization level. You know that." Taejin looked up from the desk. "Then raise your authorization level." Sung-ho held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than most people survived doing, and then nodded once, the way he always did when he understood that a conversation was finished, whether he agreed it should be or not. He moved to leave. His hand was on the door when Taejin spoke again, the words coming out of him before he had consciously decided to say them. "She took everything she brought in, left everything we bought." Sung-ho stopped. He didn't turn around. "The closet in the east bedroom," Taejin said. "I checked it this morning. Everything she came here with, gone. Everything else, the coats, the jewelry, all of it, left on the hangers, sorted by color." He paused. "She sorted them by color before she left." The rain hit the windows. "She was organized," Sung-ho said, which was as close to a eulogy as either of them was going to manage tonight. "She was making a point." "Yes." Another silence. Then Sung-ho said without turning, "Are you going to eat something?" "Get out, Sung-ho." He left. Taejin sat with the sound of the rain for a long time afterward. It was past midnight when he did it. He wasn't sure what made him move. Some restless, nameless discomfort that had been building since he sat down, the kind that lived behind the sternum and refused to resolve into anything as clean as an emotion. He got up from the desk. He walked out of the study and down the hall toward the east wing, past the rooms where security staff moved on rotating shifts, past the kitchen where someone had left a light on over the stove, down another corridor toward the suite that had been Nia's, their bedroom for 2 years. But he had never been able to make himself think of it that way. And now he was starting to understand what kind of man that made him. He stood in the doorway. The room smelled faintly of her. Not perfume. Nia didn't really do perfume, claimed it gave her headaches. Used some kind of cedar and citrus soap instead that had apparently soaked itself into the curtains and the pillowcases and didn't seem inclined to leave even though she did. He stood there breathing it and hating himself for standing there breathing it, and then he crossed the room to the dresser because that was what he had come to do, he told himself. There was a practical reason. He needed to check whether the household documents she sometimes kept in the top drawer had been taken. He opened the top drawer. The documents were there. She hadn't taken them. But something else was there too, pushed to the back, half tucked beneath an old receipt from some market she used to go to on Sunday mornings. He almost missed it. His hand moved to close the drawer and caught the edge of something small and hard instead. He pulled it out. A bracelet. Infant-sized, made of small white beads with a single pale green stone at the center. The kind of thing sold at markets and little shops near maternity hospitals. The kind of thing a woman bought for a baby she was expecting. Or maybe for a baby she was already carrying. He turned it over in his fingers. Beneath it, still half tucked under the receipt, was a folded piece of paper, small. The handwriting was Nia's. He knew it from the way she made her capital letters, a specific angle she'd never lost from years of school notebooks, slightly backward like she'd once learned to write in a hurry and never unlearned the habit. He unfolded it. 7 words. "One day our daughter will ask why." He read it once. He read it again. The room was very still. Outside, the rain was still coming down, Still hitting the windows with that relentless sideways fury, still turning the garden light silver, still drowning the flowers she had planted on a Saturday morning while he watched from the window and didn't know what to do with the sound of her laughing. The receipt crinkled in his other hand. He wasn't sure when he'd picked it up. He wasn't sure how long he'd been standing there. Our daughter. The bracelet sat in his palm, impossibly light for something that had just rearranged every single thing about his life. He sank onto the edge of the bed, her side, the left side, the side with the slight indentation in the mattress where she had slept. And he sat there with the bracelet in one hand and the note in the other, and for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, Quan Taijin did not know what to do next. That was new. That was a problem. He was still sitting there when the first gray light of morning began to dilute the storm. By the time Sung Ho arrived at 7:30 with coffee and the morning security reports, Taejin had already made 4 calls, none of them to the Yoon family or the Incheon lawyers or anyone else on the list of people who needed things from him. The calls had gone to specific individuals who operated in specific capacities that did not appear on any organizational chart. A man who ran private investigations out of a 4th-floor office in Mapogu, a former NIS analyst who now sold his skills to private clients. A woman named Choi Bora, who was the best surveillance technician Taejin had ever contracted, and who also happened to be someone he had promised never to contact again after the Daejeon situation 3 years ago. He had contacted her, anyway. Sung Ho set the coffee on the desk, looked at Taejin's face, specifically at the particular quality of stillness it had taken on, which he had seen before and which meant that something had shifted in a fundamental way, and waited. She was pregnant when she left, Taejin said. Sung Ho said nothing. He was very good at nothing when nothing was required. I need her found, quietly. No approach, no contact. I need a location, and I need to know the child is healthy. He paused. I need all of it before anyone else finds out I'm looking. Why would anyone else be looking? Taejin looked up. Because I have enemies who pay attention to what I care about. And apparently I care about something now. He set the bracelet on the desk between them. So we move carefully, we move fast, and we tell no one outside this room what we're looking for. Sung Ho looked at the bracelet for a long time. How long has she been gone? 3 days. And you didn't know? No. The word cost him something. He could feel it leaving. Sung Ho picked up his coffee, looked at the bracelet once more, set the coffee down. I'll coordinate with Choi Bora. She'll want double her usual rate for the short notice. Tell her triple. And tell her if this leaks to anyone, I will make her professional life extremely uncomfortable. She knows that. Tell her again. Nia Brooks had been careful, more careful than careful. She had been meticulous, systematic, and ruthlessly disciplined in a way that probably would have surprised people who had only seen her in her life at the Kwan compound, where she had been warm and open and laughed easily and seemed entirely too trusting for the environment she was living in. People had underestimated her because of that warmth. They had looked at the soft mouth and the easy smile and the way she got genuinely excited about plants and assumed there wasn't much calculation behind any of it. They had been wrong, and Nia had understood from early on that their being wrong was useful, and she had let them stay wrong. She had started planning 4 months before she left. It began simply: a separate phone, prepaid, purchased with cash at a small electronics stall in Dongdaemun Market on a Tuesday afternoon when she was supposed to be at a spa appointment. She had booked the spa, checked in, walked out the back, taken a bus she normally never used, and returned 2 hours later slightly damp from the November cold. The phone went into a Ziploc bag inside a box of sanitary products in the back of the bathroom cabinet, which she had correctly calculated was the one storage space in the entire compound that would never be searched by anyone. After the phone came the money. Small amounts, moved carefully, converted to cash over several weeks through a rotation of ATMs in different districts. Not enough to raise any automated flag in the account monitoring that she correctly assumed was in place. Taejin trusted her, but he was also constitutionally incapable of not protecting himself, which she had understood long before she started planning and had already factored in. By the time she walked out with her 2 suitcases, she had accumulated enough to disappear for 8 months without touching anything connected to any name he knew. The apartment was in Unpyeong-gu, on the northwest side of the city, in a neighborhood of low-rise buildings and small family businesses, and the kind of streets where people were friendly without being curious. She had signed the lease under the name Yoon Mia. She had some documents that supported it, obtained through a channel she wasn't proud of, but didn't regret. And she had paid 3 months in advance in cash to a landlord who cared about the rent and not much else. She had moved in 6 weeks before she told Taejin she was leaving. Those 6 weeks, she had built a life inside the apartment while maintaining the appearance of the one inside the compound. She had stocked the Eunpyeong kitchen, arranged the small bedroom for what was coming, learned the bus routes, introduced herself to the woman at the corner convenience store as a freelance translator who worked odd hours. She had been thorough in the way that only someone with a very specific reason to be thorough can manage. The reason was 7 months along by then, invisible, under the right clothes, known to no one in her life at the compound. She had told no one. Not because she was heartless, because she was not. And the effort of keeping it from even her closest friend back in Atlanta had cost her more than she let herself think about during the long nights in the apartment. But because she had understood clearly that telling anyone while she was still inside that world was a risk she could not afford to take on behalf of someone who hadn't been born yet and had no say in the matter. Now she sat in the Eunpyeong apartment on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after Zuri was born, with her daughter nursing quietly in the crook of her arm and the autumn light coming in flat and pale through the window above the kitchen sink, and she allowed herself something she hadn't allowed in months. She allowed herself to feel tired. Not scared, not strategic, just tired in the honest, bone-deep way that had nothing to do with sleep deprivation, though that was real too, and everything to do with the fact that she had been holding herself at a specific controlled tension for so long that relaxing it even slightly made her aware of how much it had cost. Zuri made a small sound. Not distress, satisfaction. Nia had learned to tell the difference in the sharp and specific way new mothers do, cataloging their infants' every sound like linguists encountering a new language. Zuri was healthy. 6 weeks old, 7 pounds 10 ounces, with Taejin's exact shade of black hair and Nia's nose, and an expression of permanent mild skepticism that Nia found alternately heartbreaking and hilarious. She looked at her daughter's face and let herself have the thought she tried not to have too often. He would love you so much. Then she put it away, because it didn't help. Because love had not been the thing in question when he had stood in that study 3 days after the Yoon family dinner and explained in the measured, controlled voice he used for things he had decided were not negotiable, that it would be better for everyone if she found other accommodations. He had said it that way. Other accommodations. Like she was a logistical problem. Like 2 years of being in that house, learning the rhythms of it, learning him, because she had learned him. She knew him in ways she suspected he didn't know himself. Like all of that was a lease arrangement that had simply expired. He had not been cruel about it. That was almost the worst part. He had not been cold exactly either. He had been careful. Careful in the way he was careful about everything, measured and precise and utterly controlled, which was its own kind of cruel because it left her no edge to push against. She couldn't be angry at someone who was being careful. She couldn't fight someone who wasn't fighting. She had just said all right and gone to pack. And she had left the note because she was human, and because even with all the planning and the discipline and the careful architecture of the exit, there had been a part of her that wanted him to know, not to punish him, not to manipulate him into changing anything, just to know. Because whatever she thought of his choices, he was Zuri's father, and Zuri was going to grow up and ask questions, and Nia did not want to carry the weight of the answer alone forever. She hadn't expected it to change anything. She still didn't expect it to. The phone on the kitchen counter lit up, not the prepaid one, the regular one, the one with her real number, the one she kept active because cutting it off entirely would have been its own kind of flag. She glanced at it. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. It had been doing that more in the last few days. Unknown numbers. Calls that connected and then disconnected before she answered. A text last week that had simply said, "Are you nearby?" with no context. From a number that came back as unregistered when she ran it. Probably nothing. She was going to keep telling herself that until she was sure. The investigator Taejin used was named Oh Jun-seok, and he was worth every one of the considerable fee he charged because he was disciplined enough to deliver information rather than conclusions. He told Taejin what he found and let Taejin decide what it meant. which was the opposite of how most investigators operated, and the reason Taejin had used him for 8 years. He delivered his first report on day 5. "She's in the city," O said, sitting across the desk with a manila folder balanced on one knee. He was 50, dry-voiced, wore the same style of dark suit every time Taejin saw him. "I can confirm that with reasonable confidence based on movement data from 3 separate sources. She hasn't left Seoul." "How long has she been in the city under a different identity?" O looked at him for a moment. "Longer than 3 days." "How much longer?" "Based on what I can confirm, at least 2 months before she left your household." He paused. "She planned this carefully." Taejin said nothing. He had already understood that from the first hour of looking. The understanding hadn't made it easier. "The child," he said. O's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not discomfort, exactly, but the specific careful neutrality of a man choosing his words. "I cannot confirm the child's identity or status yet. I can confirm she is caring for an infant. Female, approximate age 6 to 8 weeks, based on behavioral observation data." He set the folder on the desk. "She's been seen entering and exiting a convenience store in the Northwest District on what appears to be a regular schedule. She uses cash. She doesn't use a car." Taejin looked at the folder but didn't open it yet. "Who else knows you're running this search?" "No one." "Choi Bora?" "Operates completely independently. No cross-communication, as you specified." "Keep it that way." O nodded. He stood, straightened his jacket. He moved toward the door and then stopped without being asked, which was another quality Taejin valued in him. He could sense when something had not been said yet. "What is it?" Taejin said. O turned. "My surveillance logs from the past 48 hours show something I want you to be aware of." He reached back into his jacket pocket and produced a single photograph. Printed on plain paper, low quality, the kind of image extracted from secondary surveillance, rather than anything positioned directly. He set it on the desk. "Someone else is watching the same area. Different methodology, different positioning, but the pattern is consistent, and it started approximately 2 days before I was engaged." Ichit. Taejin looked at the photograph. A figure in a parked car. The angle was bad, taken from height, probably from one of the elevated cameras O used. But the car itself was visible, and more importantly, the partial plate was visible. He picked up the photograph. "Run the plate," he said. "Already have," O said. "The vehicle is registered to a shell company. 3rd layer. It takes time to unpack, but the first layer connects to a logistics firm out of Busan that was flagged in the Chong network audit you ran last year." Taejin set the photograph down. The Chong network. He had dismantled most of it 18 months ago. A rival organization that had overreached, attempted to move into territory it didn't understand, and been comprehensively and messily reduced as a result. He had thought the remnants were exactly that, remnants scattered, unfunded, incapable of coherent action. He had thought the problem was finished. The problem, apparently, was not finished. "They know about the child," he said. It wasn't a question. O was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what they know, but they're watching the same person, and they started before you did." He paused. "I think it's worth considering that they may have been watching since before she left your household." The room went very still. Taejin stood up slowly. He crossed to the window. The same window he had stood at 3 days ago, watching the rain destroy the garden. The same window he had watched Naya from on that Saturday morning, years ago. And he stood there with the photograph in his hand and felt something move through him that was not quite fear, but was close enough to it that the distinction didn't matter. He had built an empire on the principle that the thing threatening you was always the thing you could see. He had missed something he hadn't been looking for, because he hadn't been looking. And now there was an infant girl in a Northwest Seoul apartment, and someone was parked outside who was not one of his people. He turned from the window. "I want a team at that location within 4 hours," he said. "Observation only. Do not engage, do not approach, do not let anyone see you. I want to know every vehicle in a 3-block radius, every person who enters that building, every anomaly." He moved to the desk and picked up his phone. "And I want to know the moment anything changes." Oh, picked up his folder. He moved to the door. He was almost through it when Taejin said, very quietly, something he had never said to Oh Jun-seok in 8 years of professional work. She can't know anyone is watching, either side. She has to feel safe. Oh looked at him for exactly 1 second. Understood, he said, and left. The elderly woman who ran the cafe near the Seodamun district boundary was named Mrs. Lim, and she had been serving coffee and conversation to the residents of her corner of the city for 31 years. She had an excellent memory for faces, a complete disinterest in gossip that was not her business, and a profound willingness to talk to anyone who sat down and ordered something and was reasonably polite about it. Sung-ho sat down. He ordered the coffee. He was reasonably polite. He had identified Mrs. Lim through a small and unglamorous piece of detective work. Nia had used a bus line that passed several commercial streets on its route through the northwest side of the city, and she had apparently had habits, coffee in particular, which Taejin had always known about because she went through it at a rate he had found slightly alarming, and habit was the enemy of anyone trying to stay invisible. 3 cafes near the route had yielded nothing. The 4th was Mrs. Lim's. "I'm looking for a friend," Sung-ho said. Not a lie. He was looking for someone. African-American woman, early 30s, speaks Korean well. She might have come in here with an infant. Mrs. Lim refilled his coffee without being asked. She looked at him with the calm, unimpressed expression of someone who had heard many things presented as casual inquiries that were not casual at all. "Why are you looking for her?" "She's important to someone." "To who?" Sung-ho considered his options, then said, "To someone who made a mistake." Mrs. Lim was quiet for a moment. She wiped the counter. She looked at him again, more carefully this time, with the specific attention of someone evaluating something that didn't announce itself clearly. "She comes in on Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said finally. "Always around 10. Always the same order, dark roast, no sugar. She sits by the window. She's been coming for about 6 weeks, I think." She paused. "She always has the baby. Sweet little thing, sleeps through everything." Sung-ho set down his cup. "Does she seem—" He stopped, reconsidered. "Is she all right?" Mrs. Lim looked at him for a long time. "She seems tired," she said, "but the careful kind of tired, like someone who's been watching out for something for a long time." She paused. "She laughs when the baby makes sounds. Real laughing, not the kind people do when they want you to think they're fine. She's not performing." She picked up his empty cup. "Whatever happened between her and this person who made a mistake, I hope it gets sorted. She strikes me as someone who deserves more quiet than she's getting." Sung-ho paid for the coffee. He left a tip that made Mrs. Lim look at it twice. He walked out into the morning cold and stood on the sidewalk for a moment before taking out his phone. He called Taejin. "She's real," he said. "The baby's real. 6 weeks old, maybe a little more." He watched a bus pass. "She's been here a while. She's careful, but she's got a routine. That's something." Silence on the other end. Then, "Is she safe?" Sung-ho had been with Taejin for 7 years. He had heard him ask about shipments, about rivals, about the physical security of the compound, about the structural integrity of business arrangements, and the loyalty of men in his network. He had heard him ask about many things. He had never heard him ask, "Is she safe?" about anyone. "For now," Sung-ho said. But Taejin, the other watchers, O's team flagged 2 separate vehicles last night, not one. They've spread out. They're establishing a pattern. The line was quiet. "How long do we have?" Taejin asked. Sung-ho looked at this corner of the street where Mrs. Lim's cafe sat with its yellow awning and its window that faced the street. The same window, apparently, where Nia sat on Tuesday and Thursday mornings with her daughter and her coffee and whatever small, quiet life she had built out of the rubble of the one she'd left behind. "Not long," Sung-ho said. "A few days? Maybe less." The line went quiet again. When Taejin spoke, his voice had that quality it took on sometimes in the moments before major decisions. Not cold exactly, but stripped of everything that wasn't essential, like a room with all the furniture moved out. "I'm coming in myself," he said. "That wasn't the plan." "The plan changed," Sung-ho understood better than to argue with that particular tone. "When?" "Tonight." "And if she won't open the door?" A long pause. "Then I'll wait outside it," Taejin said, "however long it takes." Sung-ho ended the call. He stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, watching the street, watching the ordinary Thursday morning proceed around him. A woman walking a small dog, a delivery scooter negotiating a narrow gap between parked cars, two elderly men arguing companionably outside a hardware store, and he thought about an infant he had never seen, and a woman who sorted abandoned clothes by color before she walked away from them, and the man he worked for who was apparently capable of waiting outside a door. He thought about all of it. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went back to work. But the package arrived on a Friday morning. Nia found it outside her door when she went to put out the recycling, a small flat envelope, the kind that held a greeting card, with no return address and no stamp. Hand-delivered then, slipped under or left leaning against the door at some point in the night. She stood in the hallway with it in her hand and did not open it immediately. She looked at the envelope. She looked at the corridor in both directions. She looked at the envelope again. Inside was a photograph. It took her a moment to understand what she was seeing. The quality was low, something extracted from a distance, the frame slightly tilted as if whoever took it had done it quickly, without positioning. But the building in the photograph was unmistakable. This building, her building, taken from across the street, catching the entrance and the two windows on either side of it, one of which was hers. On the back, in neat handwriting she didn't recognize, someone had written, "We know where you are." No signature, no further explanation. She went back inside. She locked the door. She stood in the kitchen with the photograph face down on the counter while Zuri slept in the bedroom, unaware of anything, making that small rhythmic breathing sound that Naya had learned to hear from anywhere in the apartment. She thought about her options. She had planned for several contingencies when she built this life, but she had been planning for one particular threat, and this felt like something different. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The methodology was different from what she understood of how Taejin operated. She knew enough about the way his network moved to know that his people didn't send anonymous photographs. They surveilled, they waited, they didn't announce themselves. So this was someone else. The prepaid phone was in the bedroom cabinet. She could call. There were two people she had numbers for, both of them expensive, and both of them contacts she had built specifically for situations where she needed to move quickly. She had never used either number. She had hoped she never would. She looked at the photograph on the counter. She thought about Zuri's breathing in the next room. And then she did the thing she told herself she would never do unless she had absolutely no other option. She opened the contact list on the prepaid phone and scrolled to the only entry labeled in code. A name she had not spoken in 3 days. A name she had been systematically training herself to stop reaching for every time something frightened her. She typed a message, 4 words, then she deleted it. She sat on the edge of the bed and watched Zuri sleep. She typed the 4 words again. She deleted them again. In the other room, the regular phone lit up with another unknown number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. A minute later, a text arrived from the same number. Unregistered, untraceable. The text said, "If you want your family safe, you're already running out of time." Nia read it twice. She looked at her daughter. She picked up the prepaid phone. This time, she didn't delete the message. She sent it. The message was 4 words. "Someone is watching me." Taejin read it 3 times, standing in the back of the armored SUV while Sung-ho drove, and the city moved past the tinted windows in the particular blur of late Friday afternoon. Office workers spilling onto sidewalks, street vendors packing up, the orange sodium light of Seoul's early evening beginning to replace the pale gray of the day. He read it 3 times, and then he set the phone face down on his knee and stared at the back of Sung-ho's headrest and breathed. She had his number. He hadn't known that. He had assumed she deleted it when she left. Had assumed, in the specific arrogant way he assumed things he hadn't actually verified, that she had severed everything cleanly and completely, the way she seemed to sever everything when she decided it was time. The fact that she hadn't, that she had kept a number she clearly wasn't planning to use, kept it on some other phone he didn't know about, kept it the way you keep something you tell yourself you won't need, but can't quite bring yourself to throw away. That fact sat in his chest and did something uncomfortable there. He picked the phone back up. He typed, "Where are you?" 3 minutes of silence. The SUV turned north. Outside, the Han River appeared briefly between buildings, black and flat in the failing light, and then was gone again. Her response came back as a single number. an address in Unpyeonggu. He looked at it for a long moment. Change of direction, he said. Sung-ho glanced in the rearview mirror. He had that look, the flat, careful look he used when he had opinions he was calculating whether to voice. The team is already in position at the perimeter. O's people flagged movement from the Chong vehicles about 40 minutes ago. 2 of them repositioned closer to the building. I know. If you go in now, makes Sung-ho, you'll be visible. If they're watching the building and they see you, they already know who she is to me. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. They sent her a photograph. They wanted her scared. They're not trying to stay hidden from her. They're announcing themselves, which means they're already moving to the next stage, and we don't have the time we thought we had. He looked at the window. Change of direction. Sung-ho changed direction. He didn't say anything else. That was the thing about him that Taejin had valued for 7 years and would never say out loud. Sung-ho understood the precise moment when an argument was a waste of energy and stopped having it. Most people didn't. Most people kept going past that point out of ego or habit or the need to feel like they'd registered their objection for the record. Sung-ho just drove. The building in Unpyeonggu was 4 stories of pale concrete and older brick, the kind of residential structure that had been going quietly about its business for 30 years without attracting attention to itself. Exactly the kind of building you chose if you wanted to not be found. Taejin noted that with something between professional respect and a pain he didn't have a clean name for. He also noted the gray sedan parked 2 buildings down on the east side of the street. He noted the black van positioned at the corner, engine off, windows dark. His jaw tightened. Call O, he said. Tell him I want both vehicles identified and their communication intercepted before I go inside. 10 minutes. You're going in alone? You'll be outside? He looked at Sung-ho. No one enters that building who isn't ours. I don't care what you have to do. Sung-ho pulled out his phone. Taejin stepped out of the SUV. The cold hit him immediately. The northwest side of the city caught wind off the hills in a way the Gangnam compound never did. And he had come from a heated car without a heavy coat because that hadn't been the plan for tonight. He felt it across his shoulders and didn't adjust to it. He crossed the street without hurrying, without looking at the gray sedan, without giving the black van anything to read in his posture or his pace. He walked into the building like he had been here before. He hadn't. The lobby was small and bright and smelled of floor cleaner and someone's dinner from an upper floor. Something with garlic and sesame drifting down the stairwell. A row of mailboxes along one wall, a single elevator that looked like it required patience, a staircase to the right. He took the stairs. 3rd floor she had specified in a follow-up message he had read and reread in the elevator of the SUV. 3rd floor, 305. Don't knock loud, the baby is sleeping. Don't knock loud. He stood outside apartment 305 and looked at the door. Plain metal. A small peephole. A welcome mat that was clearly not chosen for aesthetics. It was the practical kind, heavy rubber, the kind that actually caught dirt. She had probably bought it at a market. She probably walked to the market herself, cash in hand, the baby in some kind of carrier he was going to have to see to understand because he had been unable to properly imagine it. 2 years of not thinking about certain things leaving him without the vocabulary for them. He knocked, quietly, 3 times. Silence. Then the sound of movement inside, not rushed, careful. The sound of someone who had been awake and waiting but didn't want to communicate either of those things. The peephole darkened, a long pause. The door opened on the chain. He could see one eye, dark brown, and a slice of her face, and that was all. And it was still more than he had seen in 3 days, and his chest did something with that fact that he filed away to deal with later. How did you find me? She said. Not a question. An accusation. I've been looking for 5 days. That's not an answer. No, he said. It's not. He looked at the slice of her face visible through the chain. The people in the gray sedan across the street have been looking longer. I need you to let me in. Another pause. Longer this time. He heard something. A small sound from somewhere behind her. Indistinct. The particular frequency of an infant making a sound in sleep. He heard it, and something in him went absolutely still. The chain came off. The door opened. She was thinner than he remembered, or maybe that was the dim hallway light. Or maybe it wasn't either of those things. And he was just now seeing her clearly for the first time without whatever layer of managed distance he had maintained for 2 years between what he saw and what he let himself understand about it. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt and dark pants, her hair pulled back, no makeup, and she looked at him with an expression that was not what he expected. Not anger, not relief, not the specific devastated look he had been rehearsing responses to in the back of the SUV. She looked exhausted and alert, both at the same time, in a combination that made her look like someone who had been running on nerve and precision for a very long time. She stepped back from the door. He walked in. The apartment was small, clean in the way that meant something had been worked for, not naturally neat, but deliberately organized. Every surface with its specific function, nothing extra. A kitchen along one wall with a drying rack and 2 cups. A table with a baby monitor on it, the green light steady and slow. A couch with a folded blanket on one end and a burp cloth on the other. The kind of life assembled from necessity rather than comfort, practical and careful and completely self-sufficient. He stood in the middle of it and felt the specific sensation of being somewhere that had been built entirely without him. "Sit down," Nia said, not warmly. "Or don't, but close the door." He closed the door. He didn't sit. He stood near the table and looked at the baby monitor and listened to the soft static of it and what came through underneath the static. "The photograph," he said. "Tell me exactly when you found it and where." "Outside the door this morning, propped against it, not slipped under. Whoever left it wasn't worried about being quiet." "Was this the first one?" She looked at him. "Unknown numbers started about a week ago, calls that connected and then cut. 1 text before this morning." She crossed her arms. "The text said I was running out of time. The photograph just said, 'We know where you are.' You should have called me immediately." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. A quick tightening that he recognized as her controlling. The first thing she wanted to say in favor of something she'd decided was more useful. He had always noticed that. He had always known she did it. He had told himself for 2 years that her choosing her words carefully was a quality he respected, rather than something that made him aware of all the things she had decided not to say to him. "I should have done a lot of things," she said. "So should you. Let's not start there." "Nia, why are these people watching me?" Her voice was controlled, but her hands weren't. Her right hand was gripping her own left wrist, a gesture he recognized as her version of holding herself in place. "This is connected to you. I know it is. They wouldn't be watching me if it wasn't about you. So I need you to explain to me right now who they are and what they want." He pulled out a chair and sat, because he could tell she was going to need him to be at the same level as her for this conversation, and standing while she stood was not going to work. "They're a remnant network," he said. "Organization called Chong. I dismantled most of them 18 months ago. Took their territory, absorbed their operations, removed their leadership. I thought the remainder was too scattered and underfunded to pose a serious threat. And I was wrong." She absorbed this with the stillness of someone cataloging information for later use. "What do they want?" "Leverage. Against me." He looked at her directly. "You and Zuri are leverage." The name in his mouth. He watched her hear it, watched something move across her face too fast to categorize, there and gone. "You know her name," she said. "I found the note." Silence. The baby monitor breathed its soft static. Outside, a bus went past and its headlights tracked briefly across the ceiling. "She's 6 weeks old," Nia said. Her voice had dropped, not softer, but lower, stripped back to something underneath the controlled surface. 6 weeks. "And there are already people outside this building who want to use her as a bargaining chip." She looked at him. "This is your world. This is what your world does." "Yes." "And you brought it here. They found you independently. I don't know how. I'm working on that. But they were watching before I started looking. They may have known about her before I did." Something shifted in her face, a specific kind of fear. Not for herself, he knew what that looked like on her. It was quicker and more controlled. But the other kind, the kind that moved slower and went deeper. He had never seen it on her before. He understood immediately that it was the fear of a mother doing a specific calculation about her child. "How close are they?" she said. 2 vehicles within a block, but my people have them under observation. No one enters this building tonight who isn't cleared." "Tonight?" She said the word back like she was checking the weight of it. What about tomorrow? What about the morning when I need to go out? What about Tuesday when I... She stopped, pressed her lips together. You've been watching me long enough to know my schedule. I've been watching you long enough to know you have one. Specifics came from Sung Ho. From the cafe. Yes. She turned away from him. She moved to the kitchen counter, put both hands flat on it, and stood there with her back to him. He could see the line of her shoulders, the particular tension in them that meant she was working through something she didn't want him to see her work through. I built this, she said. I planned every piece of it. I spent 4 months... She stopped. I was careful. You were careful, he said. You were also in a city where people pay attention to what I care about. And they figured out before I did that I should care about you. He paused. That's on me, not on your planning. She turned around. Her eyes were dry. She was not a woman who cried when she was frightened. He had always known that. She went somewhere harder instead. Don't do that. Do what? Try to make it not my fault when half of it is. I knew what your world was. I chose to stay in it for 2 years. I chose... She stopped again, looked at him. The note I left wasn't an invitation. I want to be clear about that. I know. Then why are you here? And there it was. Underneath everything else, underneath the Chong vehicles, and the photographs, and the strategic conversation about threat levels, there was that. Why are you here? The actual question, sitting in the middle of the small, clean apartment between them, waiting. He could have given her a tactical answer. He had several ready. He had rehearsed them in the SU-5, careful and organized, the kind of answer that framed everything in terms of logistics and security and practical necessity. He had prepared that answer specifically because it felt safer than the other kind. He did not give her the tactical answer. Because I read the note, he said, and I stood in that bedroom for a long time. And then I needed to find you. She held his gaze. He could see her deciding something. Not quickly, not reflexively, but in the slow, deliberate way she decided things that mattered. The same way she had decided, apparently, to spend 4 months planning an exit. The same way she had decided to leave the note. The same way she was deciding right now what to do with a man who had told her to find other accommodations and then showed up at her door because he read 7 words and could not unknow them. She's asleep, Nia said finally. When she wakes up, I'll decide whether you can see her, not before. She moved to the table and sat down across from where he was sitting. Right now, I need you to tell me exactly what's going to happen and exactly what I need to do. And I need you to tell me the truth, not the managed version, the real one. The real one is that we need to move you and Zuri tonight, not tomorrow, tonight. The Chong people are on a timeline, and I don't know how much of it has passed. Move us where? The compound is the most defensible option. No. Flat. Immediate. Nia, I am not taking my daughter to that place. Her voice was entirely steady and entirely final. I will sleep in this apartment with a chair under the door before I do that. So find another option. He looked at her. He thought about arguing. He made a rapid and accurate assessment of the probability that argument would work and decided against it. There's a property in Seongbuk-gu, he said. Residential. Not registered to any of my corporate entities. Low profile. I used it once for protected witnesses, and the location has never been compromised. Who else knows about it? Sung Ho. Oh Jun Seok, who runs my investigation work. Choi Bora, who handled the technical surveillance on this block. That's 4 people, including you. Yes. She looked at him steadily. If I go somewhere with you, if I agree to let your people move me and Zuri, I need to understand something first. I need to understand whether you're doing this because she's your daughter, or because she's something those people outside can use against you and you want to remove the leverage. The question landed like something thrown at close range. He felt it. He made himself hold her gaze. Both, he said, because it was the truth, and he had promised her the real version. Both things are true at the same time. I'm not going to tell you one of them isn't there, because you'll know I'm lying and it'll be the wrong foundation for whatever happens next. He paused. But the second reason existed before I knew about her. The first one, that one's only been alive for 5 days, and it's already louder than anything else I've got. Nia looked at him for a long time. The baby monitor crackled softly. The light on it shifted. A brief brightening. A shift in the breathing pattern underneath the static. Both of them heard it, and both of them went still. Then the sound settled. Nia looked down at the table. She put one hand flat on it, the same gesture she'd used on the kitchen counter, grounding herself. "Give me 20 minutes," she said. "I need to pack her bag." He nodded. She pushed back from the table and moved toward the bedroom door, and then stopped with her hand on the frame. "Taijin." He looked up. "When she wakes up—" She didn't finish the sentence immediately. She seemed to be working out how to say something that had several wrong ways to say it, and maybe one right one. "She doesn't know anything yet. She's 6 weeks old. She doesn't know you exist." She looked at him directly, and there was something in her face that was neither the controlled anger from earlier nor the bare fear from the conversation about Qiang, but something else, something older and more complicated. Try to remember that she's coming from zero, that everything she learns about you starts from tonight. He understood what she was telling him. "I'll remember," he said. She went through the door. He sat at the table with the baby monitor in front of him and listened to the sound of his daughter breathing. Outside, 2 floors down and across the street, the gray sedan's engine turned over. It didn't pull away. It idled. His phone buzzed. "Oh, Jun-suk." He answered immediately. "Talk to me." "The van at the corner has company." Oh's voice was flat and rapid, the specific delivery he used when time was an issue. "Third vehicle just pulled in from the north end of the block. Different plates, same shell company signature, and—" A pause, brief but weighted. "We picked up a radio frequency from the sedan. They're not just watching, they're coordinating. Someone gave them a go signal approximately 6 minutes ago." Taijin was on his feet before Oh finished the sentence. "From who?" he said, moving toward the bedroom door. "We're working on that, but Taijin—" Another pause. "The signal didn't come from outside. The routing traces back inside your network. Someone in your organization gave them her location. Someone who knew you were here." The hallway outside apartment 305. 3 floors up. His daughter breathing in a baby monitor. His wife. And he used the word in his mind with full deliberate weight, accepting what it cost, packing a bag 20 feet away. And somewhere inside the network he had spent a decade building, someone had made a phone call. "Lock down all internal communications," he said. "Right now. Nobody talks to nobody until I say otherwise." He pushed open the bedroom door without knocking. Nia was at the small dresser, moving with the fast but controlled efficiency he recognized from every situation where she had decided something. She had a bag open on the bed. She looked up. She read his face. "How long do we have?" she said. Not what happened. Not why do you look like that. Just the operational question, clean and fast, because she understood immediately that they had moved past everything else. "Minutes," he said. "Maybe less." "Where's Zuri?" Nia crossed the room in 3 steps and picked up the baby from the small portable bassinet in the corner, lifting her with the practiced, instinctive precision of 6 weeks of doing it, cradling her against her chest as Zuri stirred and made the preliminary sounds of someone deciding whether to wake up or not. She looked at Taijin over the top of her daughter's head. He looked at his daughter for the first time. Tiny hands. A face still soft and unfinished with newness. Black hair, like his. Nose like Nia's. The expression of someone who had no idea what kind of world they had been born into and was currently undecided about the whole enterprise of being awake. He had exactly 1 second to look at her before his phone went off again. He answered it. Sung-ho's voice. Tight. "They're moving. All 3 vehicles, simultaneous. They're coming toward the building from 2 directions. We've got 4 of our guys, but they've got more. I don't know the exact number yet." And a sound from the stairwell. Below them. The specific sound of a door opening fast and footsteps that were not trying to be quiet anymore. Nia pulled Zuri closer. Taijin put the phone down without ending the call and looked at the room. The window, the door, the bag half packed on the bed. He did the calculation in under 3 seconds, the same way he had been doing calculations his entire adult life, and he reached a conclusion that he was not going to share with Nia yet because there was not enough time and there was only one move left to make. He moved to the window, looked down. Sung-ho's SUV was across the street. 2 of his security men were visible at the building entrance, and coming from the north end of the block, moving fast and not hiding it anymore, were 3 figures he didn't recognize. Someone inside his organization had made a phone call. Someone had told the Chung remnants exactly where to find his daughter. And whoever had made that call had just signed something that Taejin intended to collect on personally, slowly, and without any version of mercy at all. But that was later. Right now there was a stairwell filling with footsteps and a 6-week-old infant who had just decided she was awake after all and was beginning, with impressive determination, to... Zuri was crying. Not the preliminary sounds from before, the tentative, exploratory sounds of a baby deciding whether waking up was worth the effort. But the real thing, full-throated and immediate, the kind of crying that meant she had processed the tension in her mother's arms and was registering her opinion of it clearly. Nia pressed her closer and put a hand over her own mouth for half a second, not to muffle herself but to stop herself from saying something out loud that wouldn't help anything. Her eyes went to Taejin. He was still at the window, phone in hand, body angled in the specific way she had seen him stand when he was doing several things simultaneously inside his head and didn't want anyone to know how many. "How many ways out of this building?" he said. Not to her. Into the phone. Sung-ho's voice came back thin through the speaker. "Stairwell, main entrance, and a service exit on the ground floor east side. East side is exposed. They've got a vehicle positioned there. The roof. Locked access from inside. You'd need... Send Choi Bora to the roof access on the outside. Now!" He turned from the window. He looked at Nia. His eyes went briefly to Zuri. That same expression from before, the one he had allowed himself for exactly 1 second before everything started moving, and which he shut down now because there was no room for it. "We're going up. The roof. Choi Bora will meet us. She has equipment on the east building, the one adjacent. It's 20 feet across. We can bridge it." Nia stared at him. Zuri was still crying, a hot, urgent weight against her chest, and Nia's hand moved in automatic circles on her back. Soothing, constant, the body doing what it knew even while the mind was doing something else entirely. "I'm carrying a 6-week-old infant. You want me to cross a gap between buildings 20 feet in the air. I'll carry her. You'll..." She stopped, looked at him. "You've never held a baby in your life. Then this is a bad time to practice. So you'll cross first and I'll hand her to you from the edge." He moved to the door. "We have about 90 seconds before whoever is on those stairs reaches this floor. Bag or no bag, decide now." She looked at the half-packed bag on the bed. Formula, diapers, 2 changes of clothes, the small stuffed rabbit that Zuri didn't care about yet, but that Nia had bought on a Tuesday and had since become structurally important to her own sanity. She grabbed it. She slung it over her shoulder one-handed, the other arm keeping Zuri locked against her. "Go," she said. He went. The stairwell above them was clear. They moved up fast, Taejin ahead with his hand on the door frame at each landing, checking before he let her through. And she followed with Zuri against her chest and the bag banging her hip, and her heart doing something loud and sustained that she was actively ignoring. The crying was the problem. The crying was a sound that traveled. She knew this, and she held Zuri tighter and kept moving and told herself that it didn't matter, that anyone in the stairwell below could already hear them, that the noise had stopped being a tactical issue the moment Taejin said 90 seconds. 4th floor. A door marked with a maintenance symbol, and a lock that was, as Sung-ho had said, engaged. Taejin looked at it for 1 second and then took out his phone and called Choi Bora. "Where are you?" A woman's voice, brisk and slightly breathless. "Roof access exterior, north side. I'm cutting the lock from outside. Give me 40 seconds. You have 20. Then give me 25 and don't argue with me. I'm on a ladder." He put the phone away. He turned and looked back down the stairwell. From below, 2 floors down, maybe less, came the sound of a door hitting a wall. Voices, low and fast, in a dialect that wasn't Seoul standard. His jaw tightened. "They're on 2, he said. Nia didn't answer. She was looking at the roof door and doing her own counting and holding her daughter and breathing through her nose in the specific controlled way she had learned in the months when controlling her breathing was the only thing she could actually control. The lock on the roof door clicked. It swung open. Cold air and the orange-black sky of the city at night, and Choi Bora standing on the other side with a bolt cutter in one hand and an expression of profound professional irritation. She was 43, small, with short-cropped hair, and the kind of face that processed stress as efficiency rather than panic. She looked at Taejin, then at Nia, then at the crying baby, and her expression shifted for approximately half a second into something human before going back to professional. "Bridge is set," she said. "Aluminum plank rated for 300 kilos, 8-inch width. Wind is 4 knots from the northwest, which is manageable if you don't think about it." She looked at Nia. "You first. Keep your eyes on the other side, not down. It's faster than it looks." Nia looked at the plank. It was approximately the width of her shoulders. It spanned the gap between the rooftop she was standing on and the adjacent building, 4 stories above a narrow service alley. The wind was not, she noted, as manageable as Choi Bora had suggested. It moved her hair across her face and found the gap between her collar and her neck and made itself known. She looked at Tae-jin. He looked back. "I'll take her," he said. Same tone as before. Not a request. She looked at her daughter, Zuri's face against her shoulder, the crying subsiding now into something more like aggrieved hiccuping, the kind that meant she was uncomfortable but had run out of energy for full volume. She looked at Tae-jin's hands, large, steady, the hands of a man who had done many things with them, very few of them gentle. She transferred Zuri to him. He took her with a care that was almost painful to watch, the overcautious, hyper-deliberate care of someone aware in every nerve ending that they were holding something they did not know how to hold and could not afford to drop. His left hand under her head without being told to. His right arm creating a cradle automatically, the body knowing things the mind hadn't caught up to yet. Zuri looked up at him with the unfocused, skeptical expression she had apparently inherited from somewhere in his bloodline. Nia turned to the plank. She crossed it. She did not look down. She looked at the parapet on the other side, and she put one foot in front of the other, and she did not think about the wind or the 4 stories or the service alley below or anything except the far edge, and she reached it in 8 steps that felt like they lasted a week, and she put her hand on the parapet and stepped off onto solid rooftop and turned around. Tae-jin was already at the near edge. He held Zuri out across the gap. Not across the plank. He wasn't going to carry her across, she understood that immediately. He was going to hand her over the open air, and Nia was going to take her, and then he was going to cross. She reached out, both hands. He transferred Zuri across the gap, their fingers briefly overlapping, and she pulled her daughter in against her chest and breathed for what felt like the first time since the stairwell. Tae-jin crossed the plank in 4 steps without using his hands for balance, which she categorized and filed away as something she would think about later. Choi Bora crossed last, pulling the plank behind her. She dropped it on the rooftop with a clang and was already on her phone before it landed. "West side exit is clear. I've got a vehicle in the alley below. 2 minutes." From the building they'd just left, through the roof door still swinging open in the wind, came the sound of voices reaching the top floor. They moved. The alley was narrow and dark and smelled of damp concrete and cooking grease from a restaurant exhaust somewhere above. Choi Bora's vehicle was a plain white panel van, nondescript to the point of being almost aggressively boring, which Nia recognized as deliberate and expensive. She got in the back with Zuri. Tae-jin got in beside her. Choi Bora took the wheel without ceremony and pulled out of the alley at a speed that was fast without being loud. Nia sat in the dark of the van and felt her hands shaking and decided that was acceptable. Nobody spoke for 2 minutes. Then Tae-jin's phone rang. "Oh, Jun-seok," he answered. "Building is compromised," Oh said. They reached the 3rd floor. Apartment 305 was accessed. They went through it fast. They were looking for something specific, not ransacking, searching. A pause. They left a package. What kind of package? A pair of infant shoes, pink, and a note. Oh's voice was careful in a way that meant what he was about to say was going to require some management. The note says, "If you want your family back, you're already too late." The van moved through the city. Streetlights passed overhead in steady intervals. Zuri had fallen asleep against Nia's chest with the abruptness that infants achieved, one moment hiccuping and the next completely absent from consciousness. "They knew we'd left," Tae-jin said. "They knew we'd already moved." "Yes." "How?" Another pause. "I've been working on that. The radio signal we tracked earlier. I've had time to trace it further. The routing is—" Oh stopped. The pause lasted long enough that Tae-jin pulled the phone from his ear and checked that the call was still connected. It was. "The routing comes back to a device registered inside your compound, Tae-jin. Not a burner, not a ghost account. A registered device on your household network. Another pause. It's registered to Park Sung-ho. The van stopped at a light. In the back, Nia heard the name. She watched Taejin's face. She had never seen it do what it did in the next 3 seconds. Not in 2 years of watching him process hard information in the controlled, impenetrable way he processed everything. It went through something she had no name for. Not anger, though that was in there. Not shock, though that was too. Something structural. Something that looked like a man watching a load-bearing wall come down. Say it again, Taejin said. Oh, said it again. Taejin ended the call. The light changed. The van moved. Choi Bora drove without asking questions, which Nia suspected was a professional habit that had kept her employed and alive for a significant period of time. Taejin sat with his phone in his hand and looked at the floor of the van and said nothing for 60 seconds. She counted. She had nothing else to do, and counting was something concrete, something with a fixed relationship between what you put in and what you got out, which was in short supply tonight. Then he said quietly without looking up, "Call Sung-ho's number." She wasn't sure he was talking to her. She looked at him. He was looking at her. "You have it," he said. "You messaged me from a separate phone. You have mine, which means you have the network contact list you copied before you left. Call his number." She didn't ask how he knew about the contact list. She reached into her bag for the prepaid phone and found the number and called it. It rang 4 times. Sung-ho answered. "Nia." His voice was exactly the same as it had always been. Flat, dry, unremarkable. The voice of a man who had spent 40 years carefully removing everything unnecessary from himself. "Are you safe?" "We're in the van," she said. "Good." A beat. "Put him on." She held the phone out to Taejin. He took it. She watched his hand. It was completely steady, which was worse than if it had been shaking. "Where are you?" Taejin said. "Itaewon. Small bar near the Hamilton. I'm having a drink." A pause. "I figured I had some time before you worked it out." Sung-ho. Don't do the name thing. It doesn't mean the same thing when it's coming from you right now, and we both know it. Taejin's grip on the phone didn't change. His face didn't change. The only thing that changed was something very deep behind his eyes. Some last calibration moving into a final setting, like a scope locking onto a target. "How long?" "Long enough." "How long?" A sound from the other end. A glass being set on a bar. The Chung network reached out about 8 months ago, before you knew about the baby, before any of this. They knew about Nia, they knew about the arrangement with the Yoon family, and they made a calculation that if your personal life was sufficiently complicated, your attention would divide. Sung-ho's voice was even, almost reflective, like a man describing someone else's choices. "I told them no at first. I want you to know that. But you didn't stay no. The Daejeon situation. The thing I don't talk about, that you've always known I don't talk about and have respected enough not to push on. They had documentation, complete documentation, names, dates, a body that was never found." A pause. "They were going to give it to the prosecutors, and I was going to spend the rest of my life in a cage." The van made a turn. City lights slid across the windows. "So you gave them Naya," Taejin said. "I gave them her general location when she was still inside the compound. They did their own work from there." A beat. "I didn't know about the child. That I need you to believe, for whatever it's worth. I didn't know." "It's worth nothing." "I know." Silence. "The signal tonight," Taejin said. "The go order. That was you. You were inside the building. I knew they were moving. If I didn't give them confirmation that you were there, they were going to assume the surveillance had been burned and pull back. And if they pulled back, they would have come back later with more people and a better plan. And I..." Sung-ho stopped. "I thought if it happened tonight, with your team already in position, it could be contained, that nobody would get hurt, that it would end." "You thought?" "Yes. You thought," Taejin said again, and something in the word the second time made Nia's stomach drop, not because of anger. Anger she could have predicted, anger she was accustomed to existing in the atmosphere of his world, but because of the absence of it. The word was empty, scoured clean. "You put my daughter in a building with armed men because you thought it would be contained." No answer from Sung-ho. Tell me where you are, specifically. No, not defiant, tired. I'm not going to do that. I've got maybe 40 minutes before your people find me regardless, so let me use them the way I want to. Another pause. I'm sorry, Taejin. I know that doesn't... I know what it's worth, but I've been with you for 7 years, and I know you well enough to know you're not going to believe I wanted this. So I'm telling you anyway, because there's nothing left to lose by it. You're right that I don't believe you. I know. You have 40 minutes, Taejin said. Use them however you want. He ended the call. He held the prepaid phone out to Nia. She took it. Their fingers didn't overlap this time. She looked at him. The van was quiet except for the road noise and Zuri's breathing. Choibora drove with the particular focused stillness of someone who had decided that whatever was happening in the back of her vehicle was not her business until someone told her it was. 7 years, Nia said. Not asking, processing. Yes. He knew about me. Before the Yoon family. Before any of it. Yes. She looked down at Zuri, at the small, slack face of her daughter sleeping through the end of everything Taejin had thought he understood about the structure of his life. So when the Yoon family started pushing for the arrangement, when the pressure came to send me away, he was part of that pressure. Taejin's voice was flat. I don't know how much. I don't know if he manufactured it or amplified what was already there. I don't know yet. He turned his head and looked at the window. I'll know. She understood what that meant. She didn't address it. There were things about his world she had always understood without requiring elaboration, and that had always been one of them. So the plan, she said, getting Zuri and me to the Seongbuk property, the safe house. Sung-ho knows about it. A pause. Yes, Taejin said. So we can't go there. No. She absorbed this. Oh, Jun-seok, does Sung-ho have access to him? They've operated in the same network for 3 years. I have to assume any location Oh knows is compromised until I can verify otherwise. He turned from the window. Choi Bora's operation is clean. She works independently. Sung-ho has never had direct access to her network. Nia looked at Choi Bora's shoulders in the front seat. Does she have somewhere we can go? That's a question for her. Nia leaned forward. Do you have somewhere we can go? Choi Bora's eyes appeared in the rear-view mirror briefly. I have a place in Dobong-gu, studio apartment above a dry cleaner. Nobody knows I use it except me. She paused. It's small. Small is fine, Nia said. There's no baby equipment. I have a bag. Choi Bora's eyes in the mirror again. Something in them that was not quite sympathy, but was adjacent to it. All right, she said, and changed lanes. The studio in Dobong-gu was everything Choi Bora had promised. Small, bare, with the faint chemical smell of the dry cleaner 2 floors below, drifting up through the building's ventilation in a way that was probably not ideal but was not immediately harmful. A mattress on a low frame, a table with 2 chairs, a bathroom that was entirely functional if not spacious, a window that faced a blank concrete wall rather than the street, which under current circumstances was an asset. Nia set up a sleeping space for Zuri on the mattress, using the bag's contents with the systematic efficiency that 6 weeks of solo parenting had built into her hands, whether she wanted it there or not. Choi Bora had disappeared to make calls from another room. A courtesy or a professional habit, Nia wasn't sure which. It didn't matter. Taejin sat at the table. He had not spoken since the van. He had helped carry the bag up the stairs without being asked. He had checked the window and the door and the layout of the apartment in the rapid, automatic way he checked all spaces. And then he had sat at the table, and he had been there since, with his phone face down in front of him and his hands flat on either side of it. She got Zuri settled. She stood up. She looked at him across the small room. Taejin. He looked up. The Chong Network, she said. Sung-ho fed them information for 8 months. That means everything you've been planning, every operation, every arrangement, they've had intelligence on all of it. I know. Which means you don't know what else is compromised. You don't know who else in your network they've reached. You don't know what they've been building with 8 months of inside information. She moved to the table and sat across from him. Your empire might be burning right now, and you're sitting in a studio apartment in Dobong-gu. I know, he said again. She looked at him. Really looked. The way she had mostly stopped letting herself look at him somewhere in the second year inside the compound, because looking at him that directly had started costing her too much. He was 41 and looked it tonight in a way he usually didn't. The lines around his eyes visible, the particular gray that had been coming in at his temples for the last year, catching the apartment's overhead light. He looked like a man who had just watched the architecture of his certainty come apart at the connection points, one by one, starting with the one person he had trusted past the point of verification. "What are you going to do?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to rebuild," he said, "from what I know is clean," which is a much smaller number of things than it was this morning. He looked at his hands on the table. "And before I do any of that, I'm going to find out exactly how deep this goes. Every person Sung Ho talked to, every piece of information that moved, every plan they made with what he gave them. And then," he looked up, his eyes were steady. "And then I'm going to dismantle every piece of it," he said. "Personally." She held his gaze. In the corner, Zuri made a small sound and resettled without waking. The dry cleaner smell moved through the room on an almost imperceptible current of air. "You can do that," she said. "You can burn your whole world down to find out what's rotten in it and rebuild from the ashes, and probably come out the other side with something just as dangerous as what you started with." She paused. "But I need to know something first." "Ask it." "When it's done, when the Chong people are gone and the traitors are handled and the empire is rebuilt and the crisis is over." She kept her eyes on his. "What does done look like for us?" "For her." She didn't gesture toward Zuri. She didn't need to. "Because I didn't survive 4 months of planning and 3 weeks in this apartment, and tonight on a roof in the dark to end up back in a situation I already left. I need to know what you're offering, not what you feel, not what the bracelet made you understand about yourself. What you are actually, concretely prepared to do differently." Tajin looked at her for a long time. Outside, Seoul moved in its nighttime rhythms. Traffic on the distant arterial roads. The city doing what cities did, regardless of what happened inside the small rooms stacked within them. The dry cleaner smell. The overhead light with its slight fluorescent flicker. He opened his mouth to answer. His phone went off. Not a call. An alert. A specific alert, one he had configured years ago for a specific category of event. A sound he had not heard in 18 months, because the last time it fired he had been sitting in a car outside a warehouse in Busan, and the event it announced had changed the operational landscape of the entire city. He looked at the screen. His face did the thing again, the structural thing, the load-bearing wall thing. He turned the phone so she could see it. The alert was from the monitoring system on the Quan compound. 12 words, automated, precise, and completely without context for the catastrophe they described. Compound security breach. All systems offline. Multiple entry points compromised. And below it, a second alert, this one from Oh Jun-seok's personal line, arriving 10 seconds after the first. They weren't after Nia. She was the distraction. They're inside the compound now, and they brought enough people to... The message ended there, mid-sentence. Oh Jun-seok's message ended mid-sentence, which meant one of two things, and only one of them meant Oh Jun-seok was still... Oh Jun-seok's message ended mid-sentence. Taejin stared at the screen for exactly 2 seconds. Then he was on his feet, moving to the window, not to look out. There was nothing to see from this window except concrete, but because his body needed to be vertical and moving while his mind did what it was doing. Nia watched him from the table. She didn't ask questions. She read the room the way she had always read rooms, quickly and accurately, and what she read told her that questions right now would cost time that didn't exist. He called O's number. It rang 6 times. 8. Voicemail. He called a different number. One of O's secondary contacts, a man who ran the technical monitoring station inside the compound's East Annex. It rang twice and then connected, and then there was nothing but background noise, the specific chaotic background noise of multiple voices in a space where something had gone wrong before the line went dead. He stood at the window with the dead phone against his ear for 1 second longer than was rational. Then he lowered it. "The compound is taken," he said. Nia said nothing. Sung Ho gave them 8 months of intelligence. Movement patterns, staff schedules, security system architecture, override codes, all of it. He turned from the window. His voice was doing the stripped thing again, the thing where everything unnecessary had been removed. They use Naya as the forward operation. Pull my attention to the northwest side of the city, get me out of the compound with most of my security detail, leave the building with the skeleton crew. He looked at the phone in his hand, and then walk in. Is O alive? I don't know. He moved to the table and sat back down, not because he was calm, but because he needed a surface to work from. He opened a different application on his phone, something Nia didn't recognize, a custom interface with more access points than anything commercially available. His fingers moved fast. I have 12 people I can reach who have no direct line to Sung Ho. People who operated in separate cells, no cross-contact. I need to know which of them are still at positions I can use. How long? 20 minutes to reach them all. Another 10 to assess. He was already typing. Choi Bora. Choi Bora appeared in the doorway as if she had been waiting for her name, which she probably had. She looked at Taejin's face, and then at the phone, and then back at his face. Compound? Yes. How many do they have inside? Unknown. Enough to take 12 security staff and disable a full monitoring system simultaneously. He looked up. I need transportation. Multiple vehicles, clean, no connection to anything in my network. I have 3. 2 sedans and a van. She moved into the room and pulled out her own phone. Who are we going to get? Everyone I can reach who isn't compromised. He looked at her directly. I need you to run logistics on this. I need vehicles staged. I need a communication network that doesn't touch anything Sung Ho had access to, and I need a location we can use as a staging point within 15 minutes of the compound. Choi Bora looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone doing a rapid internal calculation about risk and compensation. Then she nodded once and went back to her phone. Taejin looked at Nia. This was the part he had been working out since he read O's unfinished message. He had been working it out in the stripped, mechanical way he worked out problems that had no comfortable solution, not looking for the good option, because there wasn't one, but for the least destructive configuration of bad ones. You and Zuri stay here, he said. Choi Bora's location. Nobody knows about it. You don't open the door, you don't use the regular phone, you don't contact anyone until I send you a specific code through the prepaid line. He slid a piece of paper across the table. He had written the code while he was talking, which she noted without commenting on. If you don't hear from me in 4 hours, stop. He stopped. Tell me the rest, she said. There's a number on the back of that paper. Woman in Mapogu, she runs a private service that relocates people who need to leave the country. She doesn't ask questions. You have enough cash in that bag for her fee and 3 months anywhere you choose to go. He held her gaze. If you don't hear from me in 4 hours, call her. Nia looked at the paper. She looked at him. She kept her voice completely level. And if I call her, what do I tell Zuri in 10 years when she asks about her father? The question hit him somewhere between the ribs. He didn't let it show. He couldn't afford to let it show because letting it show would cost him something he needed for the next 4 hours, and he was already running a deficit. Tell her he tried to fix what he broke, he said. That's the truth. Whatever happens tonight, that's the truth. She picked up the paper. She folded it and put it in her pocket. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully decode, not because she was hiding it, but because it had too many components for a single reading, compressed into the face of a woman who had stopped sleeping properly 6 weeks ago and had been operating on controlled nerves since before that. Come back, she said. 2 words. Not a plea, a directive. The tone of someone issuing an expectation rather than making a request. He stood up. In the corner, Zuri slept. He looked at her for the 3 seconds he allowed himself. The small face, the black hair against the pale blanket, the impossibly complete unconsciousness of an infant in a world that was currently, in several adjacent rooms and across the city, doing its worst. Then he walked out. What? The first call he made in the stairwell was to a man named Baek Hyunwoo, who had run weapons procurement for the Kwon network for 11 years from a nondescript auto repair shop in Seongdong-gu, and who had never, in that entire time, had any operational contact with Park Sung-ho. The separation had been structural, built into the network's architecture because Taejin had always believed in compartmentalization as a survival strategy rather than an organizational preference. Tonight it turned out to be the most important decision he had ever made. Beck picked up on the second ring. I heard. How? Scanner. They're not running quiet. Whoever's in your compound isn't worried about police frequencies. They think they've already won. A pause, the sound of movement, something heavy being shifted. I've been trying to reach you for 40 minutes. Who else is reachable? Han Jiho is clean. Ryu Min Suk, clean. I confirmed 20 minutes ago. The Seongbuk cell, all 4 of them. They've been dark for 2 hours, but dark meaning no signal, not dark meaning gone. I think they pulled back when the compound alert fired. Another pause. Taejin. They have O. He had already known. The unfinished message. But knowing and hearing it said in Baek's flat confirmation voice were 2 different experiences, occupying 2 different parts of the body. The first lived in the mind. The second landed in the gut. Alive? He said. As of an hour ago. They're using the compound's own communication system, which is, it's a message. They want you to know they have him, and they want you to know they're comfortable enough in there to use your own equipment. A beat. They're waiting for you. I know. This is a trap. I know. Taejin, what's your count on available people? A pause. 14. Maybe 16 if the Seongbuk cell resurfaces. Weapons. Enough. More than enough. I need them staged in Itaewon within 45 minutes. Use Choi Bora for vehicle coordination. She'll reach out in the next 10 minutes. He had reached the bottom of the stairwell. He pushed out into the cold air of the alley behind the dry cleaner, his breath fogging immediately. And Beck, the man who ran the Chung Network's operations before I dismantled them 18 months ago. Do you know if there's a surviving leadership structure? One name. Beck's voice shifted, went flatter. Chung Myung-soo, younger brother of the man you took down. He was out of the country for the last 2 years. Thailand, we thought. Staying clean. Waiting. We thought he was done. A beat. We were wrong. Chung Myung-soo. The name meant nothing to him, and everything. A face he had never seen belonging to a man who had spent 2 years building a machine specifically engineered to take apart everything Taejin had spent a decade constructing. Who had found Sung Ho, who had found Naya, who had identified the exact leverage point in a man who had spent his entire adult life making sure he didn't have leverage points. A 6-week-old girl in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner. Is he in the compound? Taejin said. Unknown, but if I had to, yes or no? Yes, Beck said. It's his operation. He'd want to be there for the end of it. Taejin stood in the alley with the cold in his breath and the weight of what the next 2 hours were going to cost. He thought about O's unfinished sentence. He thought about Sung Ho's voice on the phone. Tired, resigned, the voice of a man who had already traveled the full distance of his choices and arrived somewhere he couldn't come back from. He thought about Nia's 2 words at the door of the studio apartment. Come back. 45 minutes, he said to Bak. Itaewon, don't be late. They staged in the parking structure of a shuttered shopping complex 3 blocks from the Kwon compound. 14 men arranged between 4 vehicles in the specific silence of people who had done dangerous things before and understood that talking before them was a waste of the energy you were going to need afterward. Choi Bora had coordinated the vehicles in 38 minutes, which was 2 minutes inside the window, and she had done it without being asked twice about anything. Taejin stood at the back of the lead vehicle with Baek and Han Jiho, who was 29 and had the lean, sleepless look of someone who'd been running on adrenaline since the compound alert fired, and laid out what he knew on the hood of the car like a map he was building from memory. 3 entry points, he said. East Gate, West Service Entrance, and the underground access from the parking structure on the compound's south side. They came in through East and West. That's standard. That's the obvious approach. They'll be expecting a counter entry from the same points. He looked at Han. Underground. It'll be covered, Han said. Yes, but it's the one they're least comfortable with because it's the most confined. Confined space favors smaller numbers with better information. He looked around the group. We go in through the underground in 2 teams. I take the first. Beck takes the second. We don't engage anyone. We don't have to. We move to the central monitoring station on the first floor because that's where they'll have O, and that's where Chung Myung-soo will be if he's running this personally. And if he's not there, Beck said, then we find out where he is and we go there. Nobody asked what happened after they found him. The nature of this kind of gathering meant that question had already been answered without words. They moved out at midnight. The underground access to the Quan compound ran through a maintenance corridor that connected to the parking structure beneath the east wing, a passage that most of the compound's security staff had used regularly, and that Tejian had used perhaps 4 times in 10 years, preferring the main entrance in the way that people who own things prefer to use the front door. He used it now without hesitation, moving through the dark of the corridor with Han Ji-ho at his shoulder and 3 other men behind them, the passage close and damp with the particular underground smell of concrete that never fully dried. His ribs hurt. He hadn't mentioned this to anyone. In the chaos of exiting the apartment building in Unpyeonggu, the stairwell, the roof, Choibora's ladder, he had caught his side on the roof parapet hard enough to feel it in his breathing, and 3 hours later it had settled into a dull, persistent wrong note in every inhale. He breathed through it. He had breathed through worse. The point was to keep breathing. The maintenance corridor ended at a steel door. He put his hand on it, looked at Han. Han nodded. He opened it. The East Wing's ground floor service area was lit by emergency lighting, strip LEDs running along the floor, throwing everything in low red-white that turned faces into something unfamiliar. 2 men were visible at the far end, backs to the door, positioned facing the main corridor that led toward the compound's central space. Neither of them heard the door. The emergency lighting worked against them. It lit the room, but it also created hard shadows at the edges, and the doorway Taijin had come through was in one of those shadows. The next 45 seconds were fast and close and specific, and when they were over, both men were on the ground and restrained, and the corridor was clear. Taijin was breathing harder than he wanted to be. The rib made itself known urgently. He pressed his forearm against it for a moment, a piece of applied pressure that helped marginally, and then he moved. The central monitoring station was on the first floor, in what had originally been designed as a large study before the building's security infrastructure had been retrofitted around it. It was the compound's nerve center, screens, communication equipment, the server racks that ran the building's surveillance and access systems. It was also, as Baek had confirmed from the scanner intercept, where the Cheong people had set up their operational command. He heard voices before he reached the door. Not many. 3, maybe 4. And underneath the voices, something else. A sound he identified and moved toward before he had consciously processed what it was. The specific sound of a man trying not to make noise while in pain. Short, controlled exhales. The sound of discipline fighting biology. Oh, Jun-seok. He reached the door. He didn't stop. He went through it. The monitoring station was exactly as he remembered, and completely unrecognizable at the same time. His screens running other people's operations, his equipment in other people's hands, his space occupied with the casual confidence of people who had decided it was already theirs. 4 men, positioned at different points in the room. Oh Jun-seok was in a chair against the far wall, wrists zip-tied to the armrests, blood from a cut above his eye dried to a dark line down one cheek. His head came up when the door opened, and his expression did something when he saw who it was. Not relief, not yet. Something more complicated than relief. The expression of a man who had been calculating odds for several hours and was now reassessing all of them. The 4 men in the room moved. What happened next was not clean. Nothing about the next 3 minutes was clean or controlled or resembling anything that could be described in orderly sequence. It was bodies and noise and the particular violent geometry of a confined space with too many people in it who all want different things. And Taejin's rib screamed at him through all of it, and he ignored it with the total focused contempt for physical inconvenience that only truly angry men can sustain. When it was over, he was breathing in short, hard pulls that he was not going to acknowledge. And there was blood on his left hand that was not his, and 2 of the 4 men were not getting up on their own, and the other 2 had Han's people on them. He crossed the room to O. He cut the zip ties with a folding knife from his jacket. O moved his hands immediately, working circulation back, the first wholly practical thing a man did when his hands were free after being bound. He looked at Taejin. He looked at the room. "How bad is your rib?" O said. "Stop." I could hear it in the stairwell. "Oh." "Cracked, not broken, probably. The way you're—" "Stop." He looked at him. "Are you mobile?" "Yes." O stood. using the chair arm for 1 second of assistance before he had his feet properly under him. He was pale under the dried blood, but his eyes were clear. Chong Myung-soo. He was here until about 40 minutes ago. He took 6 people to the East Wing, the private residence level. Tae-jin looked at the door. He knows you're here, Oh said. He had a sensor on the underground access, not a visible one, a passive monitor, the kind that doesn't alert. It just records. He knew the moment you came through. He paused. He's waiting for you. Then he'll get what he's waiting for. Tae-jin. Oh's voice had something in it that was not its usual measured register. He has Sung-ho. The room was quiet. He picked him up from the Itaewon bar, Oh said, about 2 hours ago. Sung-ho made his deal with the Cheong network thinking he was buying himself protection, thinking that if things went wrong for you, he had a safe landing. Oh looked at him steadily. He didn't understand that he was the loose end, that once the operation was complete, he was the only person who could testify to the arrangement. They were always going to kill him. Yes, Tae-jin absorbed this. He stood in the middle of his compromised monitoring station with a cracked rib and blood on his hand that wasn't his, and let the specific cold clarity that he had built his entire adult life to have access to fall into place like a structure settling after an earthquake. Everything shifted, some things broken, but the foundation still down there, still holding. 7 years. And Sung-ho had been afraid of a cell. And Chong Myung-soo had found that fear and used it like a key. He understood it. He even understood Sung-ho, which was perhaps the most uncomfortable thing he had learned tonight. Not forgave, not excused, but understood. In the way you understand something you would never do, but can trace the steps toward. That understanding was not going to change anything about what came next. He looked at Han. Take O and get the south exit secure. I want a vehicle ready. He looked at O. You go with Han. I don't take direction from O. A pause. O looked at him with the expression of a man choosing between professional pride and situational intelligence. He chose correctly. East Wing, private residence level, O said. 2nd floor. The room at the end of the hall was lit when they moved through. He paused. He's not running. He came here to finish this in person, and he's waiting for you to come to him. I know, Tae-jin said. He was already moving toward the East Wing. The private residence level was the oldest part of the compound, renovated twice but still carrying the bones of its original construction in the way old buildings did. Wider hallways, higher ceilings, the sound of footsteps slightly different from the newer sections. Tae-jin had walked this hallway every day for 8 years. He knew which floorboards registered and which didn't. He knew the way the light from the compound's exterior fell through the window at the end of the corridor at this time of night, winter light, thin and exact. He knew this ground. Chong Myung-soo did not. The door at the end of the hall was open. Light from inside stretched into the corridor in a thin yellow rectangle. From within came the sound of movement, slow, deliberate, someone who was not trying to be quiet because they didn't feel they needed to be. And underneath that sound, barely audible, the sound of a man's breathing that was wrong in the way breathing got wrong when the body had been interfered with significantly. Sung-ho. Tae-jin reached the door. He went through it. The room had been his father's study, a long time ago, before his father was the kind of person who needed a study to be strategically designed rather than personally chosen. There were still books on the shelves, real ones, the kind his father had actually read, old and slightly warped from decades of soul humidity. A desk that had been moved to make space for 2 chairs placed facing each other in the center of the room with the deliberate, theatrical quality of an arrangement someone had thought about. Chong Myung-soo was in one of the chairs. He was younger than Tae-jin had expected, mid-30s, slightly built, with a face that would have been unremarkable on any Seoul street. He was wearing a dark jacket, and he sat with his legs crossed and his hands folded in his lap, with the composed, contained energy of someone who had been practicing stillness as a strategy for a very long time. He looked like someone who had spent 2 years in Thailand learning how to wait and had gotten extremely good at it. Sung-ho was in the other chair. His hands were not bound. There was no visible restraint. What kept him in the chair was the man standing behind it with a hand on his shoulder and the specific posture of someone communicating a message through physical proximity rather than words. Sung-ho looked at Tae-jin. His face did something complex and immediate and painful, The Taejin filed away to examine later, in whatever version of later existed after tonight. Cheong Myung-soo looked at Taejin. He smiled, not warmly, the smile of a man who had been holding a particular card for 2 years and was finally setting it on the table. "I thought you'd send people first," he said. His voice was mild, educated. He spoke with the slight cadence of someone who had spent time abroad recently. Coming yourself is either very confident or very angry. "Where's your other 6 people?" Taejin said. "Redistributed." He unfolded his hands. "Your team in the East Wing found 3 of them already, I think. The other 3 are above us, on the roof. They're not coming down regardless of what happens in this room. I've instructed them to be patient." He tilted his head slightly. "Sit down." "No. You're going to want to be sitting for what I'm going to tell you." "Say what you're going to say." Cheong Myung-soo looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of someone recalibrating their approach without changing their destination. Then he said, "My brother was a brutal man. I want you to understand that I know this. He was brutal and he was reckless, and the territory he controlled was controlled badly. And if you had simply taken it and left him with his life and something to manage, I would have been content to let it go." He paused. "But you didn't leave him with his life. He came after mine first." "I know. I'm not telling you it was unjust. I'm telling you it was personal." He looked at Taejin steadily. "Everything I've done for 2 years has been personal. The network, the planning, Sung-ho, all of it. Not business. Personal." A pause. "I want you to understand the difference because I think you might be the only person in this room who actually does." Taejin looked at him. He thought about the bracelet. He thought about 7 words written in a specific backward-angled handwriting and left in a drawer for him to find. He thought about personal versus professional, and the ways they were different, and the ways they were the same, and how he had spent a decade telling himself they didn't have to touch. "What do you want?" he said. Cheong Myung-soo reached into his jacket pocket. Slowly, with the deliberate telegraphing of someone who understood that speed in this room would have consequences, he set an object on the arm of his chair. A phone. A phone with a live video feed on the screen. Taejin's eyes went to it. The feed showed a room he recognized. The studio in Dobong-gu. The dry cleaner's chemical smell somehow made present by seeing the space again. And in the corner of the frame, the pale blanket he had looked at for 3 seconds before he walked out the door. His chest stopped. The blanket was empty. "She's not hurt," Cheong Myung-soo said, reading him with the precision of someone who had been reading him from a distance for 2 years and knew where to look. "Neither is the child. I want to be clear about that." He looked at the phone and then back at Taejin. "My people have been in Dobong-gu for the last hour. When Choi Bora left to coordinate your vehicles, she left a window. A very small window, and I want to give her credit. She's excellent at her work, but a window." He paused. "They're both safe, and they will remain safe. This is not a threat against them. This is a negotiation." Taejin stood very still. "What do you want?" he said again. The same words, an entirely different weight. Cheong Myung-soo looked at the phone, then at Taejin. "I want you to walk away," he said. "From all of it. The network, the operations, the territory, everything your name is attached to in this city. You dissolve the Kwan organization, you transfer assets to a third party of my designation, and you leave South Korea with your family within 30 days. He said it quietly, precisely, like a man reading terms he had been drafting for a very long time. "In exchange, your family is untouched. Sung-ho is released. And I give you my word that the child, your daughter, will never be in a room like this one again." Bet. The room was very quiet. Sung-ho's breathing, the slight sound of the man behind his chair shifting weight, and through the phone speaker, barely audible, the sound of Zuri crying, high and clear and absolutely certain that it wanted to be heard. Taejin heard it. Every single carefully built structure inside him, the decade of calculation, the empire of controlled distance, the architecture of a man who had made himself impossible to reach and therefore impossible to hurt, absorbed that sound and shook. Cheong Myung-soo watched it happen. You have 10 minutes to decide, he said. After 10 minutes, I make a different kind of phone call. He reached for the phone on the chair arm. His finger hovered over the screen. And the negotiation becomes considerably less. 10 minutes. Taejin looked at the phone on the arm of Cheong Myung-soo's chair. The video feed was still live. The studio in Dobong-gu, the empty pale blanket in the corner of the frame, the sound of Zuri crying coming through the small speaker with a clarity that made the distance between here and there feel both very large and completely irrelevant. He looked at Cheong Myung-soo's finger hovering over the screen. He looked at Sung-ho in the chair. Sung-ho was looking at the floor, not avoiding his eyes. He had moved past the point where avoidance meant anything, and they both knew it. He was looking at the floor the way a man looked at something when he understood that whatever happened next was already beyond anything he could affect, and the looking was simply what his eyes did while the rest of him arrived at that understanding. Taejin took a breath. The rib made its complaint. He let it. 2 things, he said. His voice came out level. Before the 10 minutes start, Cheong Myung-soo raised an eyebrow. Patient. Still composed. Still holding the phone. First, Taejin said, call your people in Dobong-gu right now and have them step outside the building. Not away. Outside. Where I can see them on that feed. He nodded at the phone. You said this is a negotiation. Negotiations require both parties to believe the terms are real. Right now I can't verify she's unharmed, and I can't think clearly about your terms while I can't verify that. So call them outside. Cheong Myung-soo considered this. Then he picked up a second phone from his jacket. His own, not the one with the feed, and made a brief call in a low voice. 20 seconds. He set it back down. On the feed, movement. 2 figures crossing the room and out of frame. A door closing. The camera angle showed the blanket in the corner and a sliver of the kitchen and nothing else. And then, small, partial, at the very edge of the frame, Nia's hand. Just a hand resting on what appeared to be the kitchen counter, and the hand was still rather than shaking, which told him everything he needed to know about her current state. She was afraid, and she was holding it, and the holding was working. Second thing, Taejin said. Go ahead. The roof. Your 3 men. Call them down now. Cheong Myung-soo smiled. Not the earlier smile. Something more careful. That's not a condition I'm prepared to... It's not a condition, Taejin said. It's information. My people are already on the roof. They've been on the roof for 6 minutes. Your 3 men are already contained. He watched Cheong Myung-soo's face. I'm telling you because I want you to know I'm not lying to you about anything else I'm going to say in this room. Check if you want. It'll take about 30 seconds. Cheong Myung-soo looked at him. He picked up his phone again. A shorter call this time. 4 seconds, no answer. He tried a different number, same result. His jaw moved very slightly, the only crack in the composed surface. He set the phone down. So, Taejin said, your people outside Dobong-gu, your people on the roof, and the 6 your people found in the East Wing, which leaves you, the man behind Sung-ho's chair, and whatever you're carrying in your jacket. He looked at Cheong Myung-soo steadily. I'm not telling you this to threaten you. I'm telling you because if we're having a real conversation about what happens next, you should know what the actual situation is. The room was quiet. The man behind Sung-ho's chair had shifted, not dramatically, not retreating, but a fractional repositioning that communicated awareness of changed circumstances. Cheong Myung-soo had not moved at all. He was looking at Taejin with an expression that had shed the composed performance layer and arrived at something underneath it. Still controlled, but honestly controlled now rather than strategically controlled, which was a different thing. You came in here without a weapon, Cheong Myung-soo said. Yes. Why? Taejin looked at him. He thought about how to say the next part accurately, because accuracy mattered more than impact right now, and he was aware that what he was about to say was going to sound like something it wasn't. Because I came here to make a decision, he said. Not to win a fight. If I'd come to win a fight, I'd have sent 12 people through that door 60 seconds ago, and this conversation wouldn't be happening. He looked at the phone on the chair arm, at the edge of Naya's hand in the corner of the feed. Your offer. Dissolve the network, transfer assets, leave the country in 30 days. Yes. I'm going to tell you what I'm actually prepared to do, Taejin said. And then you're going to decide whether it's enough. Cheong Myung-soo said nothing, listening. The Kwan network as it currently exists will be dissolved, not transferred. Dissolved. Operations wound down. Territory relinquished in pieces over 90 days. No buyer, no successor structure. No reorganization under a different name. Done. He paused. I stay in Korea. That's not negotiable, and I'll tell you why. I have a daughter who was born here, and I'm not starting her life by making her a fugitive before she can walk. But I step back from active operations permanently. No new ventures, no expansion, no re-entry into the kind of work that made me a threat to your brother or anyone else. He let that sit for a moment. In exchange, you give me your word, not as a businessman, as a man, that the Chong Network's interest in my family ends tonight, permanently, not a ceasefire, an ending. Chong Myung-soo was quiet for a long time. You're offering me less than I asked for, he said. I'm offering you more than you can take by force, Taejin said. You can take the compound. You can damage the network. You might even be able to push me out of the country if you're willing to spend the next 2 years fighting for it. But you can't dismantle the Kwan organization. I'm the only one who can do that, and I'm the only one who knows where every piece of it is. He looked at him. You came here for an ending. I'm giving you one. A real one, not a wound. Chong Myung-soo looked at the phone on his chair arm. He looked at Sung-ho. He looked at the room, his father's books, the warped spines, the desk that had been moved. He looked at Tae-jin. Your word, he said, that it's real. Yes. How do I verify that? You don't, Tae-jin said. Not tonight. You verify it over 90 days by watching it happen. He paused. Your brother and I never had a conversation like this one. We had the other kind, and they ended the way they ended. This is a different kind. I need you to decide whether you can tell the difference. A long silence. The man behind Sung-ho's chair was completely still. Cheong Myung-soo reached out and picked up the phone with the video feed. He looked at it for a moment, at the kitchen and the blanket and the edge of Nia's hand. He looked at it with an expression that Tae-jin categorized as a man weighing personal against practical and finding, perhaps for the first time in 2 years, that the practical was heavier. He ended the video feed. He stood up. 90 days, he said. I'll be watching every one of them. He walked to the door. The man behind Sung-ho's chair followed. At the threshold, Chong Myung-soo stopped without turning around. My brother's name was Cheong Do-yun, he said. Whatever he was, he had a name. I want you to know it. Then he walked through the door. Tae-jin stood in the room. He listened to the footsteps move down the corridor and diminish. He breathed, short, careful, the ribs still insisting on being acknowledged. He looked at Sung-ho, who was still in the chair, still looking at the floor, still occupying the specific stillness of a man who had used up every form of forward motion available to him. He crossed the room and sat in the chair Chong Myung-soo had vacated. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Chong Do-yun, Sung-ho said finally, quietly. I didn't know his first name. Neither did I. Another silence. The Daejeon situation, Tae-jin said. The thing you didn't talk about. Sung-ho looked up. His eyes were dry and very tired. Does it matter now? No, but I want to know. Sung-ho looked at him. Then he said in the flat, stripped way he said things that cost him. There was a man, 11 years ago before I came to work for you. He was connected to a network I was running interference for. Not your network, a different one I left. He was going to talk to prosecutors about the whole operation. I made a decision. He paused. The kind of decision you can't unmake. And Chong's people had the documentation. Yes. He looked at the floor again. I told you I said no at first. That was true. I said no 3 times over 4 months, and then they showed me the file and I said yes. He was quiet. 7 years with you, and I said yes. Tae-jin looked at him for a long time. He thought about what Nia had said in the studio apartment. Your world. This is what your world does. He thought about Chong Do-hyun, who had a name, and whose death had made a younger brother spend 2 years building a machine of revenge that had ended here, in this room, in their father's old study with the warped books and the moved desk. He thought about the long chain of decisions that connected things that looked unconnected. A body 11 years ago, a file, a frightened man, A phone call, a bracelet in a drawer, 7 words. Everything connected to everything. I'm not going to tell you what happens to you now, Taejin said. You know what happens to you now. Yes. I need 48 hours with the full operational records before anything changes. Location of every document you passed, every communication you had with Chong's network, every piece of intelligence they have that came from you. He paused. All of it. Completely. Yes, Sung-ho said again. Taejin stood up. He looked down at him, at the face that had been across desks and in cars and on phone calls for 7 years. The face he had trusted past the point of verification, because trust past the point of verification had felt somehow like loyalty rather than blindness. He understood now that they were not the same thing. He understood now that he had confused the two in the specific way that people who are afraid of needing anyone confuse them. He did not say anything else to Sung-ho. He walked out. Metsim. He called Nia from the corridor. She picked up on the first ring, which told him she had been holding the prepaid phone. It's over, he said. A pause. Not long, 3 seconds, maybe 4, the length of a breath being let out slowly. Are you hurt? She said. My rib, nothing serious. Come here, she said. He went. The drive to Dobong-gu took 22 minutes through the thinning traffic of post-midnight Seoul. Baek drove because Taejin's hands were shaking by then, the adrenaline finally releasing its hold on his body's chemistry the way it always did after, flooding out and leaving the plain physical cost behind. The rib was worse than he had been willing to admit. A deep, persistent pressure with a sharper note underneath it when he breathed fully, which he stopped doing, which Baek noticed and didn't comment on. He was grateful for that. The dry cleaner smell hit him when he came through the building's street door, familiar now from 3 hours ago when it had been background detail, and now more present, more specific. The smell of ordinary life continuing to be ordinary regardless of what happened in its vicinity. He climbed the stairs slowly, not because his legs were weak, but because he was allowing himself, for the first time since he left this building, to feel the weight of what the night had cost him without trying to manage it. The door to the studio opened before he knocked. Nia stood in the doorway. She had changed out of the sweatshirt into something else, a zip-up jacket over a dark shirt, practical, the outfit of someone who had been ready to move at any moment. Her hair was still pulled back. She looked at him from the doorway, and her eyes did their thing, the thing they had always done, the thing he had spent 2 years trying not to be undone by. They saw past the front of him to whatever was actually there, and they did it in approximately 1 second without trying. She stepped back. He came in. The studio was dim, the overhead light off, a small lamp on the table casting something softer. Zuri was in the corner in her blanket arrangement, asleep again with the infuriating ease of someone too young to know what sleep cost. Choi Bora was not there. She had gone when Nia told her it was clear Taejin would learn later, with the professional discretion of someone who understood when a room needed fewer people in it. He stood in the middle of the studio and looked at his daughter sleeping. Then he sat down on the floor. Not the chair. The floor, his back against the wall beside Zuri's corner, his legs out in front of him, his head back against the plaster. The rib protested the position and then subsided into something more bearable. The way pain did when you stopped fighting it and just occupied the same space as it. Nia looked at him. She looked at the floor space beside him. She sat down beside him, not touching, her back against the same wall, close enough that he was aware of the warmth of her without it requiring any decision from either of them. They sat like that for a while. Chung Myung-soo, she said. Not a question. He's gone. We reached an arrangement. Will it hold? Yes. He thought about the conversation in the study, the phone with the video feed, the way Chung Myung-soo had said his brother's name at the door facing away from the room, and what that cost him to say. He came here for an ending. I gave him one that he can live with. He paused. It costs me the network. Nia was quiet. Not immediately, he said. 90 days. Everything wound down. Territory released. Operations closed. He looked at the lamp on the table. Done. And you agreed to this? I proposed it. Another silence. Longer this time. He heard her breathing beside him. Steady, even. The breathing of someone who was processing rather than reacting. Why? She said. He thought about how to answer this accurately. He had the tactical answers like the leverage calculation, the cost-benefit analysis, the strategic logic of dissolution versus extended conflict. All of it real, all of it true. None of it the right answer to the question she was actually asking. Because he was standing there with a phone and my daughter was crying through the speaker, he said. And I understood something. He looked at Zuri, the small rising and falling of her chest. I understood that I could win the fight and still lose everything worth keeping. And I've been losing things worth keeping for a long time without noticing because I was busy winning fights. He paused. I noticed tonight. Nia looked at her daughter. The Yoon family, she said. The arrangement. Was that Sung Ho? I don't know yet how much of it was manufactured versus amplified. It doesn't fully matter. The pressure was real enough that I used it as a reason to do something I'd already convinced myself was practical. He looked at the floor. I sent you away because it was easier than admitting that having you in that house had gotten past every wall I'd built. And I told myself it was strategy. A pause. It wasn't strategy. She absorbed this. She didn't respond to it immediately, which was exactly what he expected from her. She had never responded to things immediately when the thing being said mattered. She let them land and sat with them and decided what to do with them on her own timeline, and he had always known this about her and had always, quietly, respected it more than he could say. I left the note, she said. I told myself it was just so you'd know, so I wouldn't be carrying the secret of her alone. She was quiet for a moment. But I left it in the drawer you used, not in the room, not somewhere obvious, that specific drawer. She paused. I knew you'd find it. He looked at her. I think I left it because I wasn't as done as I told myself I was, she said. And I needed you to know she existed because some part of me needed you to know, not to fix anything. Just, she stopped, started again. She's going to need to know who she comes from, both sides of it. She's going to need to know where she belongs. A pause. I didn't want to be the reason she didn't get to know that. He said nothing. That's not forgiveness, she said. I want to be clear about that. I know. That's just the truth of why I left the note. She looked at Zuri. Forgiveness is something else. That takes time and actions, and I've been through enough tonight that I'm not making any promises about it right now. I'm not asking for it right now. Good. They sat. Zuri made a small sound in her sleep, the kind that wasn't distress, but was something internal, some dream event being processed in whatever passed for dreams at 6 weeks old. Nia's hand moved automatically toward her and then didn't quite reach, suspended in the air for a moment before returning to her own lap. She looks like you, Nia said. The hair, the way she holds her jaw when she's not happy about something. She has your nose. She has my mother's nose. My mother would be... She stopped. Something moved across her face. She would have a lot to say about all of this. Does she know? No, I haven't told anyone back home. I was afraid of... I didn't want anyone trying to help and making things more complicated. She paused. I'm going to call her tomorrow. She'll want to come. She'll be on a plane before I hang up. Something happened to his face that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, an involuntary movement at the corner of his mouth that he didn't try to suppress because suppressing it would have cost more than it was worth. Nia saw it. She didn't comment on it, but something in her posture changed very slightly, a fractional settling, a small release of something that had been held at a specific careful tension. The way a wire went when the load it had been carrying shifted to something else. There are things I'm going to need, she said. Not tonight, but when there's time to talk about it properly. Things that have to be different. She looked at him. Real things, not promises. Tell me. Not tonight, she said again. Tonight I'm too tired and too angry and too... She exhaled. Tonight I just need to be in a room where nobody is trying to use my daughter to get to you. That's all I need tonight. All right. Tomorrow I'll have the list. I'll be here for it. She looked at him to check whether he meant that in the specific way she needed him to mean it. Not as reassurance, not as a tactical statement, but as a plain fact about location and availability. He held the look. She found what she was checking for. She looked back at Zuri. They sat against the wall for a long time without talking. The lamp on the table made its small, warm circle. The dry cleaner smell moved through the room in the almost imperceptible current that buildings made at night when the ventilation shifted. Outside, Seoul continued its business, a city of millions processing its own ongoing complications, indifferent to the specific weight of this room and what had been arrived at inside it. Taejin's rib ached. He didn't move. At some point, he wasn't sure exactly when, couldn't have placed it precisely. Zuri woke up. Not distressed, not alarmed, just awake. The way she went between states without the transitional signals that adults used. She was simply asleep, and then simply not. Her eyes open and unfocused and moving in the way newborn eyes moved, processing light and shapes and the very early raw data of a world she was still getting calibrated to. Nia moved to pick her up. Taejin said very quietly, "Can I?" Nia looked at him. He looked back. She sat back against the wall. He shifted carefully, managing the rib, and he reached into the corner and picked his daughter up for the second time. The first time having lasted approximately 4 seconds on a rooftop in the dark before being transferred across open air. This time there was no urgency, no gap to bridge, no reason to hand her back immediately. He got his left hand under her head the same way he had before, the body remembering the mechanics, and he settled her against his chest. Zuri looked up at him, the unfocused, adjusting gaze of someone encountering a face for the first time in stable conditions. She looked at him with the same faint, skeptical expression she had worn on the rooftop, and then her eyes did something, a slight narrowing, a brief focusing, as though some very early and very basic system had registered something familiar in the voice or the heartbeat or the warmth and was attempting to categorize it. His chest was doing something he had no framework for. He sat with it. He looked at her face, the hair and the nose and the jaw, the composite of two people who had arrived at this floor by a route that had cost a great deal and damaged things that would take time to repair. And he understood, in the plain and non-negotiable way you understood things that lived below the level of words, that this was the most important thing he had ever held in his hands, more important than any deal. More important than any territory, any network, any empire of careful power and managed distance that he had spent a decade building around himself, because building things around yourself was easier than letting anything get close enough to matter. She mattered. Both of them mattered. And mattering, he was learning, was not a weakness to be managed. It was the only thing that made any of the rest of it worth anything at all. Nia watched him. She watched him hold their daughter, and she let herself watch without managing her own face for once, without calibrating what she showed. She was too tired for calibration, and the room was dim enough, and the night had been long enough that the careful architecture of what she permitted herself to feel had simply run out of material to work with. What she felt watching him was complicated. It was not simple forgiveness, and it was not simple love, and it was not simple anything, because nothing about the last 6 weeks had been simple, and nothing about the next year was going to be simple either. There would be the list she had mentioned. There would be hard conversations and harder silences, and days when the distance between where they were and where she needed them to be would feel unbridgeable. But there was also this, a man who had dissolved an empire in a single conversation rather than make a phone call she would hear through a speaker. A man sitting on the floor of a studio apartment above a dry cleaner holding a 6-week-old girl with the terrified total care of someone who understood precisely what he was holding and was unwilling to get it wrong. She could work with this. It would take time. It would take the list and the conversations and the days that were hard, and the willingness, from both of them, to stay in the room when staying was the harder option. It would take her mother arriving from Atlanta with opinions about everything, and Zuri growing into someone who would eventually ask questions that neither of them would have perfect answers to. It would take all of that, but she could work with this. She leaned her head back against the wall. Taejin held his daughter. The lamp made its small light. Outside the window, the city that had spent the whole night doing its worst began, as cities always did, to move toward morning. The dark thinned at the edges. The sounds shifted. Less traffic, more birds beginning their first arguments. The dry cleaner smell settled into something that would simply become the smell of the first morning of whatever came next. Zuri looked up at her father. He looked back at her. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that she could hear yet, and he was learning, Tonight of all nights. The value of not filling silence with words when what the silence contained was already enough. Just this. Just the three of them in a room at the edge of morning, starting from here.